Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest introduced to you now. Neil Gyte's health journey began at a weight of 260 pounds when he was far from the active and fun father that he wanted to be and was clearly on a fast track to an early grave. This moment of clarity gave Neil a sense of determination to change and set him on a journey towards better physical and mental health, largely through ultra endurance training endeavors. Recently, observing the devastating impact of chronic diseases on his family and loved ones has led him to deep dive into research, searching for the root causes and exploring ways to manage and reverse these conditions. Inspired by this revelation, he has embarked on a new life mission to help 1 billion people become metabolically healthy. He and his brother decided to swim Lake Lomond, which is 22 miles long. Wow. With zero calories to raise awareness for mental health, metabolic therapy, and chronic diseases. That's incredible. The purpose of the swim is to demonstrate the metabolic flexibility of our bodies to utilize fat as a fuel source, highlighting the potential of metabolic therapy as a natural lifestyle and nutrition-based approach, which is to also to reverse and prevent many chronic diseases. Neil Gyte, what an absolute honor just to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you very much, Casey. Delighted to be here and looking forward to having a great conversation with you.
Yeah, it was so great to meet you in person. We met in Las Vegas at the COSI convention. What an amazing conference that was. Dave Feldman did an incredible job putting that together. I couldn't hardly believe that was the very first one that he'd ever done. It was so well done. So I got to meet you there, which was great. And I just have to say, like, I've been a cyclist for most of my life. I started, road cycling and mountain biking when Lance Armstrong was winning his Tours de France and that kind of thing. And I decided in 2013 that I was going to try a sprint triathlon. And after what felt to me like nearly dying, swimming such a short distance, it's like 800 meters, I think, for a sprint triathlon. I felt like I nearly died. My heart rate was 191 getting out of the water. And I made a vow that day that was going to be the very last day that I ever swim. So when I see that you're going to swim 22 miles, that's like the last thing I would ever be doing. So that's incredible.
So it was probably about the same time as you, actually. I did my first sprint triathlon. But because I did a lot of swimming when I was younger, for me, it was I would just die every time on the run. So the swim has always been, I would say the easiest part, but I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for others who maybe didn't do a lot of swimming when they were younger, because it is a pretty technical sport. But it sounds like we started our triathlon journeys at the same time, and then you found never to do it again, and then the slippery slope leads you to do more and more and longer and longer.
We had vastly different results from our first triathlon, didn't we? you got into Ironman and much more technical and competitive triathlons, and I retired.
Yes, but it was actually, well, funny. It was great to meet you at COSI, and it's actually funny how we met. So we were actually sat next to each other, and waiting, I think, for the conversation. And I heard you speak, and I recognized your voice because I'd been listening to your podcast as part of my, journey, out of tech and into health and wellness, specifically because I had a close family member at the time who had a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. And so you had some really great episodes. I think specifically Travis Christopherson, you did a couple with him with Curable, Tripping Over the Truth, and a few others. So I've been, listening to those, and it was part of my learning journey. And then I was sat next to you at this conference. It was one of those really, surreal but beautiful kind of serendipitous moments.
I had forgotten about that. Yeah, man, that blows me away. It's my least favorite attribute about myself. It's very distinct.
It is, but I mean, yeah, I mean, it led to us speaking today, and so it's kind of nice full circle. I love the fact that you invited me to come on your podcast and talk about the potentially crazy swim challenge and all of the things metabolic health, because as I dug deeper into that and just realized how prevalent kind of metabolic dysfunction is, that the world needs. And I love all of the work that you and the team have been doing over the years, because the world just needs a lot more people to focus and educate around this space, because it's still still not well known.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We do not have triathlon in common, but we do have this passion and desire. Once you uncover this stuff, you learn about this stuff, to get it out there and share with more people. It's, why we do the podcast and interview people like Travis and Dr. Seyfried, who are doing the work and just trying as best we can to get it out there. And you're no different, man. Like I understand your passion, and to have a life goal of helping 1 billion people is a very lofty goal, but I think it's amazing. And just thinking about all the lives that you're going to impact is going to be incredible. But let's talk about how we got to that part in your own health that we mentioned in the introduction, where you got up to a weight that was pretty uncomfortable, and especially being a father, not in the way that you would have wanted.
Yeah, so that was really the start of my journey, and it was just, I think, the challenge of the 20s. I was living in Dubai at the time. I was very focused on work career. I was traveling every week to multiple cities. I was just eating the wrong things, drinking the wrong things. I had, I'll sleep when I'm dead sort of mentality at the time. So I just had everything upside down. And of course, the outcome of that is you start to become unhealthy. But it was my daughter's christening that this just became crystal clear. I tried to, play a bit of football with, family, and I had kids running around me after 30 seconds, and I had to sit down because I was out of breath. And it was just that moment of, how can I be a fun, active father if I can't even kick a football around, was the kind of the crystallizing moment for my change. So that started me on my own, health journey, which, has just unfolded. It was always just a move more, eat better, be healthy. But as everybody starts on their own journey, you then, and, obviously athletic endeavor was part of that. I just started running, and then started cycling a bit. And as I mentioned, I swam a fair bit when I was younger. And so then I decided to enter my first triathlon. And then before you know it, certainly me signing up, for others. So it's, that was really the kind of seminal point for at least my motivation to go on my own health journey.
Yeah. Okay. So at that deflection point where you decided to do something about it, I was going to ask, like, I would assume that 99 out of 100 people, when they hit that kind of point, would want to exercise more and start eating less. Is that kind of the way you approached it in the beginning?
Yeah, very much so. So I was I would say naive. That was the general kind of moniker at the time. So I think after my daughter's christening, I went back home to Dubai, and I did a 2-week juice fast, kind of vegetable and juice fast, because that was Jason Vale's kind of juice diet was one of the rages at the time. So I did that, and then decided to move more. And that's where, everything's a journey, right? I was on the SAD diet, the standard, I would say, kind of American diet. So anything you can do is better than that. But, that for a couple of weeks definitely gave me momentum. I lost, a good amount of weight in those first couple of weeks. But I'll never forget the first time I went running and tried to exercise. That was just brutally difficult. I did do a fair bit of sport when I was younger, and going to not being able to, run more than a few hundred meters without having to stop because, just my calf seized up, my legs hurt, was kind of really tough. But that's where having that right motivation, and for me, it was the promise to my daughter that I was going to be an active father. I remember the first 6 months I would, you've got to get up and do some exercise. And I had this, like 10-minute dialogue in my head of all these excuses. But whenever I came down to the, the promise that I made, then I would be out of bed. So it was 6 months of obviously, really difficult. Then you start to see the benefit and the momentum. And then once you get more into the positive cycle, you then start to, I think, obviously see a lot more back in your progress goes. And maybe just to segue a little bit into how I kind of came across more of, I would say, the the keto approach in the low carb space. And that was ironically, actually, it was my first triathlon. So I was preparing for my first sprint triathlon, which is, in the grand scheme of things, still a relatively short event. And so I went into the local bike shop where I bought my bike in Dubai, and was asking them some advice of, look, I've got this sprint triathlon, like, what do I need to eat? Because the conception at the time still is now that you have to have all these gels and sugar, and you've got to load up to do any athletic endeavor. And the gentleman pointed me to go and speak to this guy who was having a coffee in the cafe, who ended up being my coach. And he'd been to Kona, done Ironmans before, and at the time was very much on the low carb kind of keto approach and this notion of fat as fuel. So when I spoke to him, he was like, look, with the greatest of respect, you're doing a sprint triathlon, you really don't need to do anything different. You don't need to take anything during it. Your body has enough to fuel you through that. But he said, look, my approach is much more of, fat as fuel, especially for endurance, because, of, the health and a bunch of other reasons. So that got me interested in the metabolism, how, the body utilizes. And maybe to link this back to the swim is one of the reasons why, we're doing this slightly crazy 22-mile swim with 0 calories, to really demonstrate that you don't need to fuel the body, don't need to fuel the body with, sugar and carbohydrates for athletic endeavor. The body will very happily run off its own, fat as a fuel source. But the first thing that people think of when they think of any physical endeavor is, where do I get my sugar and carbohydrates from to fuel it? Because I need it as fuel. So we're really trying to bring awareness that, that is not the case. And obviously the ideal is to have metabolic flexibility where you can utilize both fuel sources.
Okay, so first of all, for the listener, ignore Neil when he tells you that a sprint triathlon is short. It's forever. It goes way, way, way long. Okay, so secondly, though, you said you started triathlon around the time that I did, so 2013. Is that when you had this conversation with the guy?
Yeah, so it was back in 2013. Yeah,
that's progressive, man. That's a long time ago.
So it is a long time ago. And then I would say, so since then, that was the sprint. I went on to do then Olympic distance and then half Ironman. And then I ended up doing two full Ironmans, back in 2018, 2019. And throughout this time, so this is that was my own personal journey. Throughout this time, I still had, family and friends impacted by autoimmune and other diseases. So throughout this time, I was continually self-experimenting. So, I would do a year of very strict, kind of keto. I would then, I would try adding carbs. I've tried carnivore. I've then switched to being full vegan. So I've tried every diet, and I don't believe in diets per se. I think you can make any of these work as long as you're focused really on, I think the macros are the most important thing that people and a lot of the diet wars are being, I think, purposefully fueled to help confuse people. You can make any of them work, but I think focus on macros is important. So I've tried a whole bunch of things throughout my time, testing on myself to see how it impacts athletic and ability, impacts on inflammation, recovery, and so forth, really to work out, what works best, certainly for me. And I'm, again, happy to, and for me, it really is a low carb approach, kind of Mediterranean style, for high-end athletic performance. So I also, post-COVID, then did a lot of, pretty high-end marathons. And I still believe for that, then, adding some carbohydrates to maximize both is beneficial for that super high-end performance. But the point is, you don't have to, you don't need to. But I would also love to test, because a lot of the latest science and research, I know Professor Tim Noakes speaks about this, that actually, if you train the body, you can get your fat oxidation rates high enough, they believe, to sustain very high-end athletic endeavor at the top end. So I still think there's some question marks. I don't think anyone's truly tried that out, but you need to invest a good amount of time to truly adapt your body and the exercise to that. But I would say there's just not enough to kind of support that is the case. But I still believe that for the majority of people, metabolic flexibility and utilizing both fuel sources, fat as the primary fuel source, is in line with our evolutionary biology, and therefore the healthiest for your longevity and health span.
Yeah, dude, that's amazing. I mean, that's the whole reason why I made it to the low carbohydrate space to begin with. So back in 2012, I had been using metabolic carts for about 5 years to test things like VO2 max and basal metabolic rate and things like that. And we would also be able to see that fat oxidation rate you're talking about, the amount of sugar, carbohydrate versus fat that somebody was burning at different intensities, and where that kind of peaked out and where that dropped off. And we didn't really know how to manipulate that. And we did this call with a guy who's doing the same thing with a different company. And he also was coaching lots of really high-end endurance athletes and triathletes. And he was telling them to eat lots of fat and to reduce their carbohydrates, especially in the off season. And their fat oxidation rates would go up and up and up. And these athletes could do these events eating very few or no calories. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, well, that makes no sense, because I'm drinking the bottles of Cytomax and all the goos and the gels, and my stomach hurts all the time. And you're always chasing, trying to refill the sugar that you're burning off in your body because you're burning it at such a high rate. But
Yep.
we could definitely get measurable differences in how much fat versus carbohydrate people could eat when they started training the right way, and also when they started fueling their body. You realize, like, why am I relying on this teeny tiny bit of sugar that I have stored in my body and needing to refill it all the time when I'm carrying with me like dead weight, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of calories of fat that is also a fuel source that could be utilized. So I think it's so cool that you were able to learn that back then.
Yeah, well, again, kudos to Luke Matthews, my coach. Well, still my coach now. Actually, I've done pretty much all my stuff with him. And he actually at the time, I think, yeah, the great analogy of, again, our body, we're like a fuel tanker, right? So, the tanker of the fuel tank is our fat as fuel. And so imagine if, that truck needs to go for, hours and hours and hours, right? It's still got limited capacity in its own petrol tank. So if you connect the two together, then that thing can go for ages and ages. So the combination of both is really powerful. And yeah, I think it's just so, as you both of us were at the time, it's the common paradigm that has prevailed for the last, 30, 40, 50 years, that you need carbohydrates to fuel athletic endeavor. And so, yeah, hence the purpose of the swim, really to raise awareness that you don't. And yes, we're doing it in an extreme way, which is by design, because we're also not advocating. We make this clear on the website that everybody should do this, and doing this is necessarily healthy per se. We are training specifically for it. The metabolic demonstration to show that we've got 100,000 calories of a fat that our body will happily use as fuel if you train and create the right environment. And more people should be aware. And then if you can use that for athletic endeavor, then for everyday life, then why do you need to be having these sugary breakfasts to give you energy to kickstart the day when our metabolism from an evolutionary perspective, and this is kind of one of the other things that amazed me as I started to really dig into the metabolic kind of research, is I always look at things from an evolutionary perspective. So we've got generally 6 liters, give or take, of blood in our body. We can only tolerate 1 teaspoon of glucose, blood sugar, in that entire 6 liters. Any more than that, our bodies have to work very hard. It's toxic, to us. And so I always, think about that. And from an evolutionary perspective, that makes sense, because prior to the agricultural revolution, we didn't have the huge amount of carbohydrate, or sugar, in the food ecosystem, but our biology is largely still the same as it was then. So I always use that as a reference and think, well, we've survived as a species without that. So, and it's now commonly known that blood sugar control is one of the most important things for metabolic health, because your body has to click on this kind of survival switch when your blood glucose goes too high, which was only ever meant really for occasional use to promote fat storage in times of food scarcity. And so I think there's a huge amount of element of that which has just been lost in the last 30, 40, 50 years of big food and big pharma largely kind of running the narrative of what kind of food and nutrition and lifestyle is and should be, and much of that has been incorrect.
Yeah, that is so well explained. I love that. And then people turn around and say, oh, keto's a fad diet. Well, the fad diet is the standard America diet. That's the more recent diet that we have tried and failed at significantly. Just go look around and you can go see that. What you're explaining evolutionarily is the oldest diet we've ever had, and the way that we should be as humans. We don't need to be eating all the time. We can use fat as a reserve. Carbohydrates are exceedingly rare. And I love how you explained how toxic sugar is and how hard the body works to regulate that and bring that back down. And so if you find occasional carbohydrates, it's not a big deal. You have an emergency system that runs through the liver that packages up this excessive amount of sugar and puts it into triglycerides and fat and stores it, which is fine if it happens every now and again if you come across a bush of berries or a fruit tree or something, very rarely. But like, you could see what would happen if you ran that emergency system all the time, every single day for many years. And that's why we have all these chronic diseases. And the other way that you're explaining is such a better way to live your entire life, not just for athletic performance, but also for the prevention and the reversal of all those chronic diseases that we already mentioned.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the other things that really stunned me as I read through the research, and actually one book in particular ties into very much what you just said, Casey, which is Dr. Richard Johnson's book on Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. And as you said, back in history, when we used to find berries in these higher source of sugar or carbohydrate foods, then we did used to eat them because our bodies are designed for times of food scarcity. The amazing thing is that has actually developed a survival pathway in our body, which is why we have this sugar addiction and carbohydrate craving, because in times of food scarcity, when you have that sweetness or that carbohydrate, that sends a signal to the body of, oh, let me stock up now because I need to store fat because I may have to go a day, a week, a month without eating anything. And we've actually selectively evolved that pathway because it saved us as a species a number of times over the last, couple of million years. But in current modern day food environment, our next meal is only ever 2-3 hours away. So you're right, we're flipping this survival switch every 2-3 hours a day. If you are eating, very high carbohydrate or, high sugar diet, and our bodies aren't designed to that. And it is that is the kind of the root cause of all of these chronic diseases. So I think that for me, but for me, the other thing is you can say, okay, sugar is one thing, but actually, he demonstrates in his book that excess carbohydrates also triggers the polyol pathway in the body. So then your body actually, by purpose, creates its own fructose internally. So you can take no fructose externally, but if you're on a high carbohydrate diet or other things like alcohol, too much salt, actually trigger the body to create its own fructose internally. It does so to damage the mitochondria to promote energy storage rather than energy utilization. So, and you put all of those things together, and back to your point, it's kind of why, the standard American diet or high carbohydrate diets, I think another analogy is in current environment, we're all slow boiling frogs. And, the more you add sugar and high glycemic carbohydrates and ultra processed food, the quicker you're turning up the heat on that pan and the quicker you are going to get some disease and kind of pass away. And I think we have agency over this. We can turn that flame right down. And I have kind of one of the things, be conscious to live more in tune with your evolutionary biology, because I think when you think of it through that perspective, it is, okay, how can I try to make better, different choices to turn off that pathway? Because it is an addictive pathway, because our bodies, ironically, are trying to save us. But the irony is, by trying to save us, they're actually leading us on a faster path to the chronic diseases.
Yep, man, that's a great point. Okay, so getting back to your own personal story, did you basically start eating a lower carbohydrate, maybe higher fat diet around that time, around 2013? And if so, what did that look like, and what things did you notice?
Yeah, good question. So yes, I did. I think it was pretty much around then, as I was training for my next 2-3 events. I was kind of full on keto, on the keto bandwagon. And so the main thing, honestly, I noticed at that time, and it's what usually brings me back to kind of just the value of ketones, especially from the brain, was the mental clarity and the consistent energy that you get from your body largely using ketones and free fatty acids as a fuel source. And so I previously went from again, kind of all of the crashes and going through the day to just being able to have this consistent energy source and having this mental clarity and acuity. I think that was the main thing I realized from an athletic endurance perspective. Obviously, I did notice that I could, I remember riding with a couple of friends at the time, and we'd go for, like a 3-4 hour bike ride, and I would just eat nothing throughout the bike ride. And they were both putting the gels and the chews down, and we get to the end of it and they just couldn't. They were like, how are you able to do that? And then we would go for some breakfast and I would have like a steak and some eggs, and they're like, you're eating what for breakfast? So there was a lot of positive things about that. At the same time, I think I also learned, because after about a year I started to struggle a bit more. But I think this is back to one of the other important pillars of kind of metabolic health, which is really kind of toxins and the quality of food that you're eating. So because I was eating a lot of meat at the time, this was back 2013. I think a lot of it in Dubai was imported. I think there was a lot of hormones and other, stuff kind of in there. So I think I started to feel, some of the, I would say, the effects of not having the cleanest kind of, ketogenic diet. So then that, plus just wanting to try and experiment different diets, then led me down to, try different diets because I wanted to see it. And I have gone extreme the other way. Like I've gone totally vegan for 6 months to see how, how that feels and how that works. So yeah, I would say they were the two kind of main things I would say that I noticed at the time, kind of switching to keto.
Yeah. Okay. I've got another question about endurance sport, but before I ask, I do want to ask about what we mentioned in the introduction, what we talked about, you being a parent. How did that change? Do you feel like that was really impacted the way you were showing up for your family?
Yeah, I mean, it was hugely impacted on a number of levels. I think first thing was my motivation was to be an active and fun father that could take my daughter and do whatever she wanted to do. And so it's enabled me to do that. And so just from one perspective, that was a huge motivation. But then there's all of the other layers that kind of go into it. Specifically, I would say, the mental health. I can talk about, a recent experience, but yeah, I do believe that the brain, especially running on ketones, gives you this clearer, calmer sense of energy. There's less, toxic kind of byproducts that get produced if you're running on, fat and ketones versus sugar and carbohydrates. And so I think that enabled me to be, yeah, much more present and much more, kind of focused on, on family and so forth. And so I just think in all ways, my health journey and realizing that has been a big part of me. But there's also the flip side of it, which is honestly the biggest challenge about being a father is then how to bring up, I just have one daughter, or bring up your children in a very difficult current modern world where there are just, cakes and Doritos and sugar at every turn and corner. And so trying to find that balance as a parent, what is good and what gives your children the best foundation and success for life, but trying to balance that, not being too strict, but educating them at the same time, honestly, has been probably the most difficult thing as a parent. So, but it definitely made me I think a much better parent, that's for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. On that note, I'm always curious, like what things have you been successful with that? Because I'm not a parent and I see parents and I wonder the same thing. Like that has to be so challenging to know what you know, feel what you feel, and then turn these kids over into the world where there's sugar everywhere. You can't hardly get away from it. What do you do?
It's honestly, it's really difficult, and I wouldn't say, and it's a constant journey, even a little bit like our own health journeys. And so, for me, it's been a mixture of things. I think, firstly, is um, trying to educate, but as I've realized, there's a challenge as a parent in trying to educate and not be seen as boring and lecturing, etc. So I've tried to do that, in fun, different ways, like through different analogies. I think also just, some of the impacts that some of the chronic diseases have had, within close people within the family are kind of, good examples of kind of what can happen. It's really difficult for kids because they live in the moment and they're not thinking, 5, 10 years above. So here's where I think I've largely landed on, which is, we have a pretty clean eating environment, at home. And I think 80% of the time, if you can do a good enough job, then 20% of the time you can have pretty much whatever you want, especially as a kid within reason. But it's finding that balance between where do you start to trigger the cravings and addictions, which then drive the kind of wanting to eat more. And so I've really tried to empower my daughter, so she's 10 now, to try and understand where that boundary is. And she she now realizes herself when she goes to her friends or goes to a party and she comes back, she's like, yeah, I feel terrible because, so getting that feedback, I think, is really important, trying to give them agency, but it still doesn't stop the battle of, of course, when you're on holiday, you want to go have one ice cream, and then they're like, "Oh, do you want 2 scoops or 3 scoops?" Like it's just, it's just a constant environment. But I think that's what, and not being too strict and dogmatic about it. I would say, my parents were pretty strict with us, growing up, which I thank them for. At the same time, maybe they were, a little bit, too strict. So that did force me, when I did get access to, to when I got found sweets and, and pizza and cookies and stuff, then I would really go to town. So yeah, I hope there's enough in there. But honestly, it is the most, one of the most difficult things as a parent. And the other parallel with this in a parent, food is one thing, but technology, social media is another good example of, generally these things which can bring, kind of great things, but also can be kind of devastatingly destructive. So it's such a challenge as a parent in the current modern environment to navigate these things. So it's and it's a constant learning experience.
Well, keep up the great work. That was a great answer. And I think that's the best that we can expect. And I think you said something really interesting that I do notice with kids, especially as they get older. I don't think we give them enough credit to how they recognize over time that they might not be feeling the best after not having a lot of those foods. Then they get reintroduced, and like all of a sudden their skin doesn't feel so good, or their tummies ache, or like they don't run around as well playing soccer. Like they kind of notice. They're smart.
So they are smart. And I think it's back to what I realized myself personally, but also, trying to help others. As I was in, kind of the early phases of my kind of health journey, and people obviously who knew me back then and saw my transformation would then ask me. So I just informally, was helping and coaching people on the side. And we're all the same, right? We only truly believe something when we experience it ourselves. But I think the challenge with all of us, and same with the kids, is how do you create that kind of normal baseline that you can then feel the impact of something bad on your body? Because once you're in kind of the standard American diet and you have so much inflammation, and your body's adapted to that, not in a good way, you can't see the wood for the trees. And so I think, and that's where the difficult thing is, how do you slowly over time then create that base and educate as softly as you can as to how, to notice these other signs and what you attribute, and get that feedback loop. So I think it's the same for adults. It's the same for kids. And we only make change when we see and realize these things ourselves.
Yeah. Again, I think that was a great answer. I really love that. Getting back to athletic performance, let's say you just finished your training block for an Ironman and you're about to do the race. Tell us what a normal day of eating would be like for you if you knew you were going to, spend 10, 12, 14 hours exercising, depending on how quick you were. And what would your race day nutrition look like for something like an Ironman?
Yeah, good question. So I've tried around with a bunch of, I would say, different things. So I have done at least half Ironmans. I've done half Ironmans, full ketogenic approach. So, Ben Greenfield was the poster keto athlete, probably still is back at the time. So I would follow his kind of protocol of having like coconut milk with, with kind of NCTs and other stuff as part of, fueling. So I did do, maybe 2 half Ironmans, like full on strict keto, and half Ironmans generally take and then in the region of like 4 or 5 hours to complete. So for my full Ironmans, I would say, and I think Chris Froome actually is probably the greatest example of an endurance athlete who I think kind of gets his nutrition approach right, which is, the off season and a majority of his training, he will do very, very low carb. But when he's in that Tour de France 21 days race, it is, you need as much, because obviously cyclists need to be as lean as they can. So, they can't afford to carry 100,000 calories, fat with them. So most of my Ironmans, I would then take largely train low. But when I was, racing and on race day, because I was chasing fast times, I would then, add carbohydrates. I would add in, more of the kind of, the sugars and that sort of stuff, because I was chasing that high end athletic endeavor. that is very different from obviously how I'm training, for the swim at the moment, because that is, specifically as a metabolic, challenge. And so right now, I largely am following a pretty strict kind of ketogenic diet, and obviously for that day, then not consuming any calories to truly kind of run off fat as a fuel source. But I really, for me, the ideal sweet spot, I think for everyone in the world, where everyone should get to, is metabolic flexibility, that your body can flex both ways. And the analogy that I like to use this to try and, I think that's what the other challenge, I think you've touched on it a number of times in your podcast, is, the diet wars don't necessarily kind of help anyone. And there's just a lot of conflicting advice out there and not enough kind of simple ways to explain it. So my, 1 billion plus metabolically healthy website, I'm specifically trying to keep it super, high level and kind of explain things in a way. So for me, I look at our bodies as a hybrid car. So we've got the electric fuel source side, which is our kind of free fatty acids and ketones. And we then got, the gasoline side, which is kind of carbohydrates and sugar. And so how can you be a hybrid car where you can use both, but just know that the more fuel that you put into your car, our bodies will then burn, that carbohydrate fuel instead of using electricity, because, because our bodies can't tolerate more than the teaspoons, full of glucose in our blood. And so, but I think that analogy, goes further, because, I also think, using ketones as a fuel source, it's a much cleaner fuel source for your body. So if you think about, a gas car, those toxins and fumes effectively, go back within our body, which is why, you need the antioxidants, the polyphenols, all these other things to try and, combat a lot of, that kind of toxic and oxidative stress. But if you can teach your body, and the more you put gasoline in your car, the less, it will forget how to use the electric side. So how can you sit more in the middle, make your body, utilize that electric side more? And if you do that, then you can use, the gas side as and when, you need. But how can you sit in that middle instead of what probably 80% of the population are doing right now, which is just consistently putting gas into the fuel tank and not utilizing, the much kind of cleaner energy source that generally we've evolved to be our primary fuel source, I believe.
Yeah, that's very well explained as well. Let's talk about this swim. We mentioned in the introduction that it's you and your brother. I'm assuming he went through an amazing transformation as well, and the two of you decided to do this swim. How did this come up as a thing that you wanted to do? Again, it's an extreme example, but it does prove a point, which is the whole point of it. It's so interesting that this can be done. How did you guys come up with this?
Yeah, good question. So it really started off with my brother. So as you say, he's had his own journey, actually mostly around kind of mental health. And so I think it was back in 2016, 2017, he was suffering with depression, was diagnosed with depression, and he was really struggling through that and trying to find things to help him manage his depression. We were on a family holiday in the Lake District in England, and I was training for a triathlon at the time, as was my brother. And so we just asked him, "Hey, Dave, do you want to come for a swim?" And he was like, "Oh no, I'm okay." And I said, "Look, I'll lend you my wetsuit. Why don't you just go for a swim?" We all used to swim, a lot when we were younger. So I lent him my wetsuit. He went out for a swim with my older brother, just across the lake and back, so a few hundred meters. And he came out of the water. Something happened during that swim, and he thinks it's a mixture of obviously the cold water, moving the body, doing exercise, but also being in nature. He said he came out from that swim, and it was like the fog lifted on his depression, and he had clarity back. And that lasted for about a day, and then the depression kind of set back in. So that led him on his own, I would say, journey out of depression, where he utilized, kind of outdoor swimming and swimming as one of the tools to help, manage his mental health journey. So he then went on to do other kind of longer and longer swims, but for him, the kind of, the romantic swim in his head was always Loch Lomond, which is, it's just one of the most beautiful lakes in Scotland. And so he'd always wanted to do this swim. He decided that September this year, he was going to do this swim. And then it was probably about 9 months ago, as he was talking about the swim, and he knows that I've done a lot of Ironmans and other things. He said, would you want to do the swim with me? So I said, yeah, I'd love to. So we kind of agreed to do the swim, and then that coincided with me, having spent 20 years in the tech industry, pivoting and my new mission to help 1 billion plus people to become metabolically healthy. And so that all kind of happened at the same time. So then I said, well, would you be up for doing, the swim with a twist, which is the 0 calorie? And we have, a close family member who's kind of, going through stage 4 cancer at the moment, who I think has, a ketogenic approach to that diet has been hugely helpful. And so it just ties a lot of, I would say what we kind of both believe in. So that's how we ended up doing the swim. And then we ended up calling it 0 to Lomond, because as we decided to do this swim, speaking to others in the metabolic health space, I realized that Dr. Ian Lake, who's a type 1 diabetic medical practitioner in the UK, actually back 4 years ago, he and I think 7 other type 1 diabetics did a challenge called 0-5-100. So it was 0 calories, 5 days, 100 miles. So they would do almost a marathon each day for 5 days. And so then somebody connected me with Dr. Lake. And so, so we then kind of, the name was ready to pay homage and shine a light on, probably the more amazing feat of this group of type 1, diabetics that did this, not eating for 5 days. And so our challenge is a bit different. The swim will probably take us, 12 to 14 hours. So, we're constantly swimming, at a pretty decent clip, to do that. But so that's really how the swim came about.
That's amazing. I remember hearing about that. I've reached out and tried to invite some of them on the show who did that bike ride. I thought that sounded amazing. Doing that. That's super cool. Tell me, like, logistically, what are some of the challenges of swimming that far? I imagine, being in Scotland right off the bat, like water temperature has got to be a thing that's very difficult. What are some of the logistical challenges of swimming that far?
Yeah, good question. So I think obviously the most important thing is safety. So we are going to have a safety boat, safety crew with us at all times to make sure that we're safe, because swimming, irrespective, swimming can be dangerous. So I think that's the most important thing. Second thing, yes, I think the weather and the lake temperature. You never know with the Scottish weather. We've got a window of like 3 days, so hopefully one of those days is good, but it can be blowing a gale, chucking it down, with rain. I would say those are the two main things. The water temperature. It's not been a very warm summer in the UK, so it's likely to be pretty cold. Maybe somewhere around, I think, 55 degrees Fahrenheit. We will be wearing wetsuits. And so Sailfish, I've always used Sailfish wetsuits. So they actually very kindly shipped us both a couple of wetsuits because my one is now starting to get holes in it because I've used it so much. So we are going to wear wetsuits because we need to put safety first. But I would say, they're the main things. And then we'll take kind of regular breaks just to take on water and electrolytes. So we still figure, probably, every hour at least to start with, because we do need to stay hydrated. Water and electrolytes, are an important part of doing this, safely. But I would say other than that, it's then back to the training kind of, and just the mental side of things of, just kind of heads down, swimming for that long. But I would say, they're probably the main, I would say, logistical kind of challenges. So we hope that the Scottish weather is kind to us.
Yeah, I hope so too. I just watched a few weeks ago the Formula One race in Silverstone, and like one of the days, it was just like you said, chucking it down with rain. It looked so cold that day. So best of luck. Hope you get a good break.
Yeah. Well, at least if it's raining, you're in the water, you're wet anyway. But it's usually rain. Usually, rain comes with with wind and waves and other things. So, but it will be what it will be. So we're just we're just looking forward to the challenge, and then trying to enjoy it as much as we can. I think for me that's going to be the interesting side from it, which is I do think when the body is running off its own fuel source and you get into that rhythm, I think there can be a really amazing space that you get to in that kind of harmony of body and mind. And so my hope is that, we get, some of that, or at least a decent chunk of that throughout the 12 hours. At the same time, it could just be a straight, like 12, 13, 14 hour, slog because of the conditions and other things. So, yeah, no, so we're both, yeah, I would say nervously excited to see how it goes and report back afterwards.
That's fantastic. I love that. And then, you're not training in Scotland, you're in Houston. So what are the challenges there? Like, what does a long training day look like for you? Are you in the pool? Are you able to find any open water? Like that must be tough.
Yeah, no, it is pretty tough. So there's no decent open water kind of swimming really near and around. And obviously it's the middle of summer in Houston. So even if so, it's pretty warm. So most of my training is pool based. So, I mean, so tomorrow I'm going to try and go and do probably in the region of like 7, 8 hours, just, in the pool swimming laps, which is, as Luke, my old coach used to say, it's all good mental training because, if you can do that in the pool for, for 7, 8 hours, then hopefully, doing it outdoors in a much nicer environment then kind of feels better. But not having that kind of cold exposure in cold water or open water is a bit of a challenge. I have been trying to get swims in I can on business trips, but then funny things happen with that. So I was in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago. So I got the first flight out to land on Sunday, hired a car, drove up to one of the lakes that seemed to be a quietish lake that was recommended for swimming. And so I went down to, and there was a kind of a lifeguard there because they had barbecues and other stuff. It kind of, set up for people to go and enjoy the day. And he said, as long as you've got, your safety visibility buoy, which I had, then no worries. Other people, go out and swim. So I get into the water. I'm about an hour in, and I'm feeling like really great. So I'm just going to swim for as long as I can, and let's see how this goes. And then I hear this like whoop whoop strange noise, and I look up, and there's a police launch, like right alongside me, and these policemen are like signaling me to kind of come. And so they tell me, yeah, that I'm not allowed to swim in the water outside of the roped off area, which is the size of a postage stamp. So there's no way I
Oh,
could do any kind of meaningful swim there. So, so I'm trying to get the as much open water swimming in as I can. But it's proving, and that was proving difficult. But I've done enough open water swimming, I think, to be comfortable with that. So I'm not overly concerned about that. The cold. So I probably will go kind of a week ahead to spend a bit of time and do some cold water adaptation because I want to get the body, used to that because it does need to be. So I would say that, yeah. So there's quite a few, I would say, in an ideal world, I would love to have more outdoor swimming, more cold water swimming. But yeah, it just hasn't been the case. So
I figured there would be challenges, but not necessarily with law enforcement. That's very interesting.
Well, yeah, you me both. So at least the next morning, then I went into the sea and did a sea swim on kind of Venice Beach up and down. So thankfully that was okay. I didn't get pulled out of the
That's
water
great.
on the sea swim, but
That's great.
it's just it was yeah, just one of the funny stories looking back on it,
I
of
love
course.
it. Well, this is going to be a great adventure. I'm so excited and looking forward to what you're going to accomplish. I'll put you on the spot here and ask if you, when you make it with the event, if you want to come back on our show and report back and tell us how everything we went. We'd love to have you. I have to say, like in my stupid, ignorant American brain, I think there's sea monsters and all the locks in Scotland. So I have to really hope that you don't get eaten by something. But yeah, it's going to be a great adventure. You and I were talking offline. You think about like an Ironman, and again, it's hours and hours and hours that you're doing this event on this one day, but it comes and goes so quickly. That day that you've been waiting for and planning on, it's here and gone before you even know it. So I do hope you enjoy in the moment as you're there, and really appreciate the time. It sounds like a wonderful adventure.
No, thank you. Looking forward to it. But no, would love to come back afterwards and report. Yeah, report on how it was. Also going to try and track as much as I can with kind of CGM and do some kind of blood labs just to kind of just understand a little bit what the body is doing kind of metabolically during the swim. So would love to come back and share all of that afterwards.
That would be great. Well, I don't want to miss this. You have changed your career recently. So tell us about changing your career. And then also, I must ask you about something we get questions about all the time, and something you know a lot about related to the company that you just started with. So first of all, tell us, what it was like to change careers and what you're doing now. And then if you could tell us a little bit about artificial sweeteners, something that is quite controversial depending on who you talk to, and you know, people debate the usefulness and different ones. And there's this one new one that's kind of hot and everybody's really kind of talking about, which is allulose. So if you don't mind, tell us about your career change and tell us about the artificial sweetener allulose.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all hopefully nicely intertwined. So my career change, yeah. So I've spent 20 years in the tech world, 12 of those at Google, and geography and digital mapping was really I would say one of my first loves. So I really explored that as a career. So I spent 12 years at Google helping to build the Google Maps platform and business and run strategic partnerships and kind of new product there. So I did that, loved working at Google, loved loved the team, loved everything about it. But throughout that time, there was always this, feeling that I'd never found, my purpose or my kind of mission in life. And my own health journey, and then, the impact of chronic disease on family and friends, especially last year, really became real. And that got me, reading and researching into all of this. And kind of as I realized that our mitochondria and metabolic health is the root cause of all of these chronic diseases. And as I then researched into it, and 70% of all of the deaths worldwide are related to, these chronic diseases. And, the US healthcare system, 9 out of every $10 of the trillions that they spend get spent on, these chronic diseases. So as I was realizing all of this, what was going through my mind was, the world of digital maps is in a pretty good space. There's lots of innovation there, but there's not enough. And I thought I was relatively, clued in on nutrition and things, but even I wasn't as I went through my learning journey. So I just realized that the world needed more people to advocate and find solutions for metabolic health. And so, yeah, it was bizarrely during kind of a meditation session back in, I think it was January, as I was kind of wrestling with what to do. And I just had this, I tried to meditate for years, but never got meditation to stick. I would start it and stop it. I would never see the point. But towards the end of last year, yeah, something told me I needed to start it again. And I managed to make it stick. But I was just doing, 10 minutes a day, kind of guided meditation using it's the Sam Harris Waking Up app. And I just had this meditation where it was like the last 10 years of my own journey, and everything that I'd learned was building this kind of big jigsaw in different ways. And I had this like 20-second period where my brain just went into this kind of different state. And I had these kind of thousands of pieces of the jigsaw, like building themselves together. My time at Google and, these kind of, moonshots of how do you go after audacious goals. They help focus the mind. Other people who had done similar, kind of things kind of inspired me. And I almost had, it was almost my second moment of clarity where I just kind of decided that my new mission in life was to help 1 billion plus people to become metabolically healthy. And so that kind of just happened in this very bizarre meditation experience. And then I come out of this meditation experience, and then the negative chatter starts. Like, that's ridiculous. Who do you think you are? You've just read about this health world. Who are you to have, kind of that aspiration? And so I ran through to the bedroom. My wife was just waking up at the time, and I blurted all of this out to her because of, one of the other things I've learned is, this accountability, that when you share things with people, it makes it real. And especially when it's something, because this was something that really came from the heart and felt true. But so many of these ideas we have and we keep to ourselves, and then negative chatter comes in, you don't end up following them. So, there was still a kind of a head versus heart battle of, of what to do. But it was such a powerful moment. And that kind of was instilled in me so much that I decided to make that my new mission. And so I set up 1 billion metabolically healthy, which is really my awareness endeavor and kind of simple ways that people can understand what metabolic health is, why it's important, and then just links to tools and resources, because there's tons of content out there. Different things will work for different people. And so that was one part of it. And the swim is part of raising education and awareness to that. But then for me, the second part of it is the need to be, especially when you look at how do you impact 1 billion people, there needs to be kind of practical, scalable tools that kind of everybody needs and can use to be able to help people on their journey, because knowledge is half of it, but life and and the environment can be challenging. So as I was looking at then, okay, 1 billion people metabolically healthy, what makes up that pie chart? You've got your nutrition, you've got movement, you've got sleep, you've got environment, toxins, you've got stress management. And I was really looking at what exists out there, what's overserved, what's underserved. And the clear thing that came from that, which is food and nutrition is underserved in terms of practical solutions to help people, reduce their sugar intake and, and turn off this, kind of the carbohydrate sugar pathway in the body, which is the survival pathway, which is, slowly leading everyone towards chronic diseases. And so very serendipitous, as I was learning kind of all of this, I came across a company called RX Sugar at the Metabolic Health Summit in Florida. I think this was in February, and heard, I've been reading the books of Dr. Ben Bittman, Dr. Richard Johnson, Dr. David Perlmutter, Dr. Dom D'Agostino. So all these legends of the metabolic health space, then talking about this rare sugar allulose and how it's not only kind of, neutral, but actually it has metabolic health benefits. And so I was listening to this thinking, this sounds too good to be true. So it's really sparked my curiosity. Long story short, I ended up, going to then the RX Sugar booth, getting some samples and going away and kind of, testing on myself, because the clinical kind of studies into this show that allulose on its own can actually lower your blood glucose level. So I started testing myself, being on a very strict ketogenic diet, adding allulose, into myself, and I effectively replicated the clinical trials they've done around this, and further dug into the research. And there's just a whole ton of metabolic health benefits that allulose, can bring. So not only is it, it was previously seen as largely neutral as a sweetener, and it is a natural rare sugar. So it's found in small amounts in raisins, in maple syrup, in figs, in wheat. So our bodies are used to, having it in our system, but it's just metabolized very differently, which is why it's 0 calorie, but it's fully functional. And so it's just this amazing, sugar that can actually help people transition and, wean off that sugar, and really give them a foundation that they can layer on other health habits on top. Because the main thing that usually stops people making nutritional change is, I believe, the fructose and that carbohydrate pathway in the body, because it's that survival switch that, again, our bodies are still trying to save us. So allulose, I think, is an amazing way to still be able to have, delicious, sweet things, but without triggering off that pathway.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I knew I goofed up when I called it an artificial sweetener. What would we call it? Would it be a non-nutritive sweetener, or is it a sugar?
So it is actually a sugar. So it's called it's a natural rare sugar. So that's effectively what it is. So it sits in the kind of the sugar family, which is what makes it very different from any of the artificial sweeteners or even the sugar alcohols. So because pretty much all of those have been shown to have negative health benefits. But I think, and the way I look at it is, because the biggest question that at the time, because I'm not skeptical about everything, but I really try to look at everything from kind of take a step back and look at the landscape. It was, okay, well, if this is such an amazing rare sugar, why is it not more prevalent in nature? But when have we ever needed a metabolically healthy sugar from an evolutionary, history? And the fact is we haven't, because sugar and fruit and fructose actually are what saved us as a species in times of food scarcity. And so I think nature has just hidden this amazing rare sugar that is there. And I think now is going to be a huge part of helping to solve the chronic disease by helping people on their own metabolic health journey, by not having to go full on kind of give up sugar and carbohydrates, but it's just this great, I think, transition tool that can still be used, long term, just as a tool really to help people, because change is difficult. Turning off that sugar pathway in the body. I know myself, I've had to do it. I've done it, on a few different times based on the diet that I've been on. It is difficult because it turns into, again, your kind of body triggering this, survival system. So yeah, I just think so. It is natural. It is a rare sugar, and all of there's even more research that keeps coming out on, the positive metabolic benefits that it can have.
Interesting. Okay, and you mentioned something else. I'm still trying to wrap my head around. I know Dr. Johnson said the same thing, and you mentioned we used to think it was just neutral. This is being shown as being like this is actually helpful, healthy. This contributes to health.
Yeah, so it's demonstrating a bunch of different things that it has, metabolic health benefits. I think that the main thing that has been proven over and over again is the impact on blood sugar control. So there was a Jenkins trial, double crossover blind trial where allulose on its own actually decreased postprandial blood sugar and insulin. And I can reference the paper, you can link it in the show notes. When you take just sucrose, so sugar, glucose, and fructose on its own, obviously you get a big spike in glucose, you get a big spike in insulin. But when you take the same amount of sugar with allulose, you get a dampening in the blood sugar spike by around 50% and area under the curve. So it specifically helps with blood sugar control, which is something that everybody really needs to think more of. And there's obviously lots of amazing work being done by kind of technology companies and CGMs to help people understand this a bit more. But it also is shown to naturally stimulate GLP-1, which is kind of the hormone that the blockbuster drugs kind of synthetically manufacture and dial up to 11. So you also get this satiety kind of benefit to it as well. And so even there was a clinical trial in, I think, Korea back in 2019 where they kept everything the same. But I think this was looking at, I think it was sucralose and then low allulose and high allulose. And the low and high allulose actually led to significant weight loss and reduction in fat, whereas sucralose was neutral. So there's just a bunch of amazing studies that have demonstrated it has positive effects on metabolism. And so not only can it be neutral, it can actually have benefits.
That's incredible. Yeah, you're making me rethink the whole thing. And then I'm also used to like telling people the sweet taste will trigger an insulin response, but that's not the case with allulose.
So it's not the case with allulose. No, I can send you all of the different papers on this, and you can link them on the show notes, because I think it's really important to know this, the kind of the science behind it. So, and this is still ongoing, but effectively, it doesn't. So the key thing is it doesn't trigger off that kind of polyol pathway in the body. So therefore, and because it also nicely stimulates GLP-1, you can have. So RX Sugar formulates these in really great chocolate bars, which are only 5 ingredients specifically designed for blood sugar control and satiety. So you can eat one of those chocolate bars, but you don't feel the need to eat 2 or 3 more because you get the satiety effect, but you also feel like you've had a sweet, and I'll happily ship some to you to taste. So maybe you tried them at the Collaborative Science Conference, because we did.
I did.
Yeah,
really good.
And they are really good. I was, amazed when I first tried them, because most of those kind of snacks tend to be artificial, but I couldn't believe how good they tasted. And I became, a customer before I decided to join the company. And back to actually, the kind of the parent thing. So having spent, 2 years trying to, kind of help my daughter understand the perils of sugar and so forth, I then found myself giving her an RX Sugar chocolate bar to take to school every day as an insurance policy. This is obviously my decision to have before the school lunch, because school lunch is obviously outside of your control. You kind of don't know, to help manage the blood glucose response for that. So I tested the product to the nth degree. I looked into all the science and research. I tried and tested myself, and we as a family kind of became users of it. But for me, again, back to, I think if the world knew more about this and knew more about metabolic health, then I think we could help people have to compromise a bit less, because that true kind of change to cut these things out are really difficult, because you're working a little bit against your evolutionary biology. So how do you get that help to bridge across to get your biology kind of back in sync a little bit with our evolutionary biology? And I think it's an amazing tool for that.
Well, thank you for that explanation. That is wonderful. I look at, myself eating a carnivore diet, and I think, why can't everybody else just eat a carnivore diet and they'd be fine? And it's just not the case. It's not real life. People have these addictions, and it's hard to give up chocolate. So I think you made a lot of our listeners very happy. And it's cool. I'm really appreciative of your skeptical approach to researching it to then come out on the other end and be, so sure of all that. So I really love that. This has been an awesome conversation, Neil. I'm so looking forward to hearing about the swim and how it went. And yeah, like we said, we'd love to host you again to tell us how it went. But for now, can you let the listener where they can go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah, of course. So a couple of different places. The main place to find me is LinkedIn. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn. So just Neil Gyte. I think there's only one, maybe two Neil Gytes. So I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. And then if you want to know more about the swim, again, I can pass these to put in the show notes. The swim website is 0-2-lomond.com. So there you can find, the swim bit of information. We're also trying to raise, funds for, causes for metabolic therapy and chronic disease. And then I also have 1bmh.org. So that's my 1 billion plus metabolically healthy kind of site initiative. So they're the three best places, I think, to find out more, and welcome anyone to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, that is fantastic. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Like I said, best of luck to you. You've got a few weeks to go, so best of luck for the rest of your training, and good luck in the water, man. I hope it's a wonderful day. I can't wait to hear about it on the other end.
Thank you. Fingers crossed. Thanks for hosting me. Really enjoyed the conversation, and definitely look forward to coming back and doing a post-swim debrief.
Excellent. That sounds great. We'll definitely look forward to that. Thank you very much, Neil, for everything you've done. Really love your story and how it ties into metabolic health, and just to have that passion and drive to go help so many people. Like I said, it's such an amazing goal. And just thank you so much for all of your work. And thank you for coming on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.